are a curse! You cursed woman! You cursed! You don't need to cry fake tears. We can see you for who you are.
Have you ever been blamed for something you had no control over? Have you ever walked into a room and felt every eye turn cold, every voice go quiet, simply because of who you were, not what you'd done? Racheal knew that feeling better than anyone. For 6 years, she had been the wife nobody wanted. Not because she was lazy, not because she was unkind, not because she had done a single thing wrong. She was blamed for something far older than her, a family's fear, dressed up as tradition. They called her a curse. And by the end of this story, that same family would be on their knees, begging the curse to save them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start from the beginning, because to understand how far Racheal fell and how high she rose, you need to understand exactly what she survived. Racheal met Chidi at a cousin's graduation party. She was 24, sharp-eyed, quick to laugh, the kind of woman who noticed things other people missed, a habit that would matter more than anyone could have guessed. Chidi was gentle, steady, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. When he proposed 2 years later, Racheal said yes without a shadow of doubt. What she didn't know, what nobody bothered to tell her, was that she wasn't just marrying Chidi, she was marrying into the Okafor family. And the Okafor family had a story about itself that had nothing to do with her, but would consume her anyway. Here's the story they told. 3 generations back, a woman had married into the family, and within a year, the family's fortunes had collapsed. A failed harvest, a burned storehouse, a son lost to fever. The elders of that generation decided, quietly, permanently, that the woman had brought bad luck into the house. She was sent away in disgrace. And from that day on, the Okafor family watched every new bride the way you'd watch a stranger holding a lit match near dry grass. Racheal didn't know any of this on her wedding day. She only knew that her mother-in-law, Mama Okafor, held her hand a little too tightly during the ceremony, studying her face like she was searching for something. Do you know that feeling of being examined, not welcomed? Racheal felt it. She just didn't understand it yet.
The first year of marriage was hard, but not unbearable. Racheal worked as a bookkeeper for a small trading company in town, quietly excellent at her job, the kind of quiet excellence that goes unnoticed until it's desperately needed. She kept the family's accounts as a favor sometimes too, back when anyone still trusted her enough to ask. Then, 3 things happened, one after another, and everything changed. First, the family's cocoa shipment was delayed at the port, and the buyer cancelled the contract. A normal business loss. It happens to every trading family eventually. Second, Chidi's younger brother, Obina, lost a large sum of money in a bad investment, a sure thing a friend had convinced him to put family savings into. Third, and this was the one that broke something loose, Mama Okafor fell seriously ill just 2 weeks after Racheal moved into the family compound. 3 misfortunes, 3 unrelated events, each with its own clear, mundane cause. But grief and fear don't care about mundane causes. Grief and fear want someone to blame. And someone remembered the old story. It started as a whisper from Racheal's husband's aunt Enny, the kind of whisper designed to travel. Since this one came into the house, Enny would say, letting the sentence trail off, letting everyone finish it themselves. Have you ever noticed how the most dangerous accusations are the ones nobody actually finishes saying out loud? Enny never once said the words Racheal is cursed. She didn't have to. She just planted the seed and let fear water it. By the end of that year, Racheal had a nickname in the compound. They didn't use it to her face, not at first, but she heard it anyway, the way you always hear the thing you are not supposed to hear. Onye in Sogbo, the trouble one, the curse.
Let me ask you something. What does it do to a person to be blamed for things they had no hand in? For Racheal, it meant her opinion stopped mattering in family meetings. It meant Mama Okafor, once she recovered, wouldn't eat food Racheal had cooked, quietly passing her plate to someone else at the table. It meant she was no longer invited to name family decisions out loud, even ones about money, the very thing she understood better than anyone in that house. It meant Chidi, caught between the wife he loved and the mother who raised him, mostly stayed silent. And silence, when you are the one being blamed, can feel just as heavy as an accusation. Racheal thought about leaving more than once, but leaving felt like confirming the story, like proof that she really was what they said she was, a woman who brought ruin and fled from it. So instead, she did something quieter, something nobody in that house would have expected from a woman they'd already written off. She started paying attention. Really paying attention. Not to prove herself innocent. She'd stopped hoping that would matter, but because the accountant in her couldn't ignore what she was saying. Every misfortune the family blamed on her arrival had a very ordinary explanation sitting right there in the paperwork, if anyone had bothered to look. The cocoa shipment delay, a port logistics issue that had affected 6 other trading families that same month. She'd heard it from a colleague. Obina's failed investment, the friend who'd convinced him had done the same thing to 2 other young men in town and had quietly left the city 3 months later. Mama Okafor's illness, poor water sanitation in the compound's older will, something the family doctor had mentioned once in passing and everyone had ignored. None of it, not one piece of it, had anything to do with Racheal. But knowing the truth and having anyone believe it are 2 very different things, and Racheal understood something crucial. In this house, the truth wasn't enough. Not yet. She would need proof so undeniable that even fear couldn't argue with it. So she waited, and she watched. And quietly, without telling a single soul, she began keeping records of everything, every transaction, every decision, every warning sign the family dismissed because they were too busy watching her instead of watching their own business.
It was a Thursday evening, the kind of ordinary evening nobody remembers until it becomes the night everything changes. Obina came home pale, shaking, unable to look anyone in the eye. He'd been gambling for months, it turned out, not weeks, and he owed a debt so large that the men he owed it to had stopped being patient. They'd given the family 30 days. 30 days, or they would go to the courts. And going to the courts meant something the family didn't fully understand yet. It meant every asset the family owned, including the compound land, would be frozen and examined, right as that quiet, unresolved boundary dispute sat waiting to be discovered by anyone who looked. Mama Okafor wept. Chidi sat frozen, running numbers in his head that he didn't fully know how to run. Enny, for the first time in 6 years, had nothing clever to say. And in the corner of the room, silent as she'd learned to be, sat Racheal, the trouble one, the curse, the woman they'd blamed for every hardship that had ever touched this family. She could have said nothing. Some small, tired part of her wanted to. 6 years of being blamed for things beyond her control had earned her the right to just watch them drown. But that's not who Racheal was. And more than that, she had spent 6 years quietly preparing for exactly this moment, even if she hadn't known it at the time. She stood up. "I can fix this," she said. "All of it, but you have to let me."
Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. Mama Okafor looked at her, really looked at her for what felt like the first time in 6 years, and asked the question that had been sitting underneath every whisper, every cold shoulder, every uneaten plate of food. Why would you help us? After everything. And here is where Racheal said the thing that would change how this family saw her forever. "Because I never brought bad luck into this house," she said quietly. "You did, by refusing to see it standing right in front of you." Then she reached into the small wooden box she'd kept hidden under her bed for 2 years, a box nobody had ever thought to ask about, because nobody had ever cared enough to wonder what the trouble one did with her quiet evenings. And she laid it all out on the table. The port logistics records proving the cocoa shipment delay had nothing to do with her arrival. The pattern of the friend who'd scammed Obina and 2 other young men before disappearing. The water sanitation report on the old well. And most importantly, the boundary dispute filing on the family land, along with the modest, still affordable resolution she'd researched and prepared, quietly, in case anyone ever asked. She hadn't just noticed the family's danger.
She'd spent 2 years building the solution to a crisis nobody else had even realized was coming. The land dispute is real, she said, and it's about to become very expensive very fast, especially if Obina's death drags this family into court. But it's still fixable. Today, this week, not in 6 months. Then she turned to Enny, and for the first time in 6 years, Racheal let herself say something sharp. And the money you've been quietly managing for the family these past 2 years, Auntie, I'd like to see those records too. Because 3 of the numbers you gave Mama last month don't match the numbers I've seen from the market. The room went very, very still.
Here's the part of the story I need you to really sit with, because it's the part that changes everything you thought you understood. It turned out Enny hadn't just spread the curse rumor out of superstition or spite. She'd spread it deliberately, strategically, because a family too busy blaming the new daughter-in-law was a family too distracted to look closely at its own books. And Enny, trusted, respected, family in every way Racheal had never been allowed to be, had been quietly skimming from the family's trading accounts for nearly 2 years. Small amounts, careful amounts, the kind of theft that looks on paper exactly like ordinary bad luck. A slightly worse harvest than expected, a slightly lower profit margin, a shipment that just didn't sell as well as this quarter. The kind of small, explainable losses a family blames on fate, especially when they already have someone convenient to blame instead. Racheal hadn't set out to expose her. She'd simply kept paying attention, the way she'd always paid attention. And 2 years of careful, patient record-keeping doesn't lie, even when the person you're looking at is the one who's supposed to be beyond suspicion. Isn't that always how it goes? The real danger rarely announces itself. It hides behind the loudest voice in the room, the one pointing fingers so nobody thinks to look at their own hands. Enny didn't deny it for long. Faced with 2 years of documentation laid out with the same quiet precision she'd used to hide her theft, she had nowhere left to stand.
Over the next 4 weeks, Racheal did what she had quietly known how to do all along. What this family had refused to let her do for 6 long years. She negotiated a repayment plan for Obina's debt directly with the men he owed, using her knowledge of local trade law to buy the family time instead of a courtroom disaster. She filed the paperwork to resolve the land boundary dispute before it could freeze the family's most valuable asset. She recovered a portion of what Enny had taken, enough to stabilize the family's finances through the crisis. And she rebuilt the family's bookkeeping from the ground up, transparent, careful, the kind of system where no single person could quietly bleed the family dry again without being caught. The compound didn't just survive. Within a year, under Racheal's quiet management, the family's trading business was more stable than it had been in a decade. But here's what mattered more than any of it. More than the money, more than the land, more than the numbers on any ledger. Mama Okafor, the woman who hadn't eaten a meal Racheal cooked in 6 years, sat down at the family table one evening, took the plate Racheal offered her, and ate every bite. No speech, no apology dressed up in fine words. Just a mother, finally, choosing to trust the daughter she'd spent 6 years pushing away. So, let me ask you the question this story has been building toward all along. How many families destroyed the very people who could save them, simply because it's easier to believe in a curse than to look honestly at their own mistakes? Racheal was never the danger in that house. She was the answer, sitting quietly in the corner, waiting for 6 years for someone, anyone, to finally ask her the right question. The Okafor family didn't lose their fortune because of an unlucky bride, 3 generations ago or otherwise. They nearly lost it because fear is easier to live with than responsibility, and blame is easier to hand out than trust is to give. Racheal never asked to be called a hero. She never brought it up again after that night at the table. She simply kept doing what she'd always done, paying quiet, careful attention to a world that had spent 6 years refusing to look back at her. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The people we're quickest to blame are sometimes the very people who could save us, if only we gave them the chance before the crisis instead of after. If this story moved you, you already know what to do. Like this video, subscribe for more stories like Racheal's, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been blamed for something that was never your fault?
I read every single comment and I want to hear your story too.